Hello, and thank you for joining today's demo, How to Manage the Fundamental Features of Enterprise Mobility Management. This is the first demo in a three-part series designed to introduce you to EMM fundamentals first, then take a deep dive on iOS devices in your environment, and finally how to set up your MAS 360 portal. My name is Kayla Bittner, and I'm your webinar master moderating today's webinar. Lindsey Elgie, our mobile master from IBM, will be walking you through the MAS 360 portal, highlighting the fundamental features of enterprise mobility management in just a minute. Real quick, just a few housekeeping items before we begin. This webinar is expected to last 1 hour and is in listen-only mode. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, so if you have a question, be sure to post it publicly in the Q&A panel at the bottom right corner of your screen. That way Lindsey can review your question. Please note, the Q&A box is where Lindsey will be fielding your questions from first, so please be sure not to confuse this with the chat box. And finally, we are recording today's session, and we'll make the link to the recording available by email. So thank you again for joining us today. I'd like to take a moment to introduce IBM MAS 360 to those of you not familiar with the product. The IBM MAS 360 platform delivers a complete enterprise mobility management solution. This one platform integrates comprehensive security to enhance employee productivity on their mobile devices and give organizations the confidence that their sensitive data is protected. There are 4 key solution bundles for total enterprise mobility. The MAS 360 Secure Productivity Suite delivers a comprehensive set of cross-platform solutions to isolate and contain work emails, web access, and app data to prevent data leaks. It's the only complete solution that enables employees to securely access corporate data while preserving the mobile experience on their devices. The MAS 360 Secure Document Sharing provides a secure encrypted container and productivity suite to distribute, view, create, edit, and share documents on mobile devices, giving organizations the control they need and employees the access they demand. MAS 360 Mobile Enterprise Gateway offers simple and secure access to behind-the-firewall business resources such as SharePoint, Windows File Share, intranet sites, and databases. And last but definitely not least is our foundational MAS 360 Advanced Mobile Management. It enables organizations to manage and secure enterprise-owned and personal bring-your-own smartphones, tablets, and laptops. It simplifies deploying private and public apps by delivering an easy-to-use enterprise app catalog with full security and operational lifecycle management. All these services work together seamlessly and provide multiple layers of management and security and granular level policy options for you to configure. It truly is the most comprehensive enterprise mobility management platform in the market. And we're excited about our newest product, Mobile Threat Management. Mobile malware is the next big security threat to every enterprise. With the trend towards bring your own device and proliferation of mobile apps, your enterprise data is especially vulnerable to rogue apps and malicious websites. IBM MAS 360 Mobile Threat Management detects, analyzes, and remediates mobile risks, including malware, suspicious system configurations, and compromised jailbroken and rooted devices. Through integration with IBM Security Trusteer, leveraged by hundreds of millions of end users to protect organizations against fraud and data breaches, IBM MAS 360 provides a new layer of mobile security to enterprise mobility management. Okay, so with that, I think we're ready to jump into the demo here. So Lindsey, over to you.
Thanks, Kayla. Give me just one moment here, and I'll be sharing out my browser. Perfect. Make that a little bit bigger for everyone, and we should be good. So just to start off, a couple of basics about MAS 360 itself. We are a cloud-based solution, so in terms of getting up and running with MAS 360, it's a very easy initiation of the account via our website. We can help you deploy in just kind of a matter of minutes in terms of getting access to MAS 360 and starting configuring policies and settings within the portal. To touch on a couple of setup items here, I do like to show the services because this gives a good summary of the different areas that we can enable for MAS 360. As you can see, a lot of checkboxes for enabling these services, very modular approach in terms of what you really need to be using from our product. That way we don't hand you a bundle of things that kind of all get implemented and hope that you use them all. We'll make sure that we get this tailored to fit the organization that we're working with. In terms of mobile device management, that's kind of our basics, our fundamentals that Kayla mentioned, iOS, Android, Windows Phone, some BlackBerry support as well. We do have laptop and desktop management for Mac OS 10.7 or higher and Windows XP Service Pack 3 or higher. So the laptops and desktops are enrolled via URL as well, and that gives us that lock, locate, and wipe functionality as well. We do have secure mail available, so we have a secure container, and that gives us the ability to provide access to corporate resources inside of a secure encrypted Mass 360 application. With data leakage prevention, we can apply through policy, some rules and regulations for where that data can move about to, and that kind of thing. So we'll touch on that policy as well. And then application management, content management, of course, providing those resources that an end user needs for work purposes and still keeping control over whether that information gets removed from devices, if the device has been lost or stolen, maybe even compromised in that situation. Secure browsers gives us the ability to provide access to intranet sites. So if you have something internal that needs to be accessed, we can help you provide that through a secure browser. This is very similar to the native browser that ships on your devices, except that we have a little bit of control over what happens inside of that browser, especially URL filtering. So if you are providing devices to students, for example, or maybe employees, we can make sure that the only websites that are accessible through that browser are appropriate for the age of the students or the employee's work purposes, and even disable the native browser that ships on the device. We do have expense management, so this is really helpful if you're providing corporate devices to your end users. We can set up an expense plan and establish compliance around the data usage on those devices, and also email integration. So we have the ability to grant you visibility of your environment, Exchange, for example, Lotus Notes, Google Mail, all that good stuff. So we'll kind of touch on that in policy as well. So that's kind of a rundown of all of our services that are available through the portal. Again, we'll kind of tailor this towards your needs. And then in terms of the deployment settings, I'll touch on the options just briefly that we can kind of configure for your environment to make sure your deployment goes as planned. As you can see, we can configure your corporate identifier to make sure that your end users have a static URL to visit and enroll their devices. And we can even kind of configure that authentication mode to either leverage a one-time use passcode or even work with an Active Directory or LDAP to leverage familiar credentials for your end user. We do have a two-factor authentication option. We've got some options for prompting ownership and self-enrollment, and even more advanced management options for Apple Configurator and Device Enrollment Program, Android for Work, Samsung Knox. So really a lot of configuration available from the deployment options. The other area I wanted to touch on in terms of getting started before we hop into the policies and the actual device management is the admin roles, because this does allow you to configure extremely granular admin roles based on what exactly should be performed and viewed within the portal. So as you can see, you can create these custom roles and really kind of just check through the functionality in the Mass 360 portal. I'll create a test role here to give you an idea of that functionality. And that gives us the option to check through and say that, yes, this admin can manage applications. No, this admin cannot fully wipe devices. Maybe this admin cannot view location information. So very granular access to make sure that no one ever logs in and performs a function that's outside of their realm of responsibility. So that gives an idea of the setup of the portal, the admin functionality, the deployment settings that you have access to. Now, in terms of the actual portal itself, a brief tour of the homepage here. We do have an alert center that's really helpful for visibility purposes for the admin, because this allows you to create these search tiles to reflect on areas that you're concerned about. So the red and green tiles, it looks like we don't have any red right now, which is a good sign, but those would be items that need attention. The green tiles are just saying that we don't have any issues with these search criteria currently. We do also have these blue tiles that are more informational for us. So if you wanted to see how many devices are on a current carrier, you could compare your Verizon versus AT&T versus Sprint and keep an eye on things. We could even create a tile with a custom attribute. So if you wanted to keep track of something specific to your environment, we can create that flag in a device record and then search for it on the home page. So I'll touch on that as well. We do have an activity feed on the right-hand side. This is nice because you can filter. So if you wanted to see compliance events for devices that have either violated a rule or been cleared for that violation, you'll have an up-to-date audit trail here on your home page. And the other thing I wanted to touch on from this home page is this device locations, because if it's of concern maybe for a logistics company or devices you're providing to your end users, this will give you a good idea of where all of your devices are checked in currently, and you can go into a little more detail if you wanted to see exactly what's reporting back on this device's record. Now, for privacy purposes, if we do have any personal devices in the mix or you really just aren't interested in seeing location information, we do have a privacy filter available as well. So this will leverage either the ownership of the device or even a grouping to say that these particular devices we don't want to track that location information for. I apologize, looks like my network's a little bit slow here. So this does allow us to turn off the collection of that information. So we can disable that so that personal devices are not reporting, but corporate devices are, or maybe just this particular group of devices should be reporting location information. As you can see, we can also enable that privacy filter for application inventory purposes. So if you do not want to see the applications that are installed across your devices, we can disable that as well, especially important for a BYOD environment. Now, in terms of the device inventory here, this will give you a good idea of kind of all of the devices we can manage. So our management is based on operating system versions. So our iOS, Android, Windows Phone, again, we can sort by those platforms here. We do also have some laptops in the mix, as you can see, and they'll report back within one inventory. So this is especially helpful if you've got those BlackBerries and laptops that you want to report in the entirety of your inventory that will show up here within NAS 360 from one pane of glass. I'm going to pull up my iPad here just to give you an idea of the device record that's going to be reported to the admin. Give this a moment to load here. Now, this is my iPad that will be reporting here, and this is going to give us a general summary page with just some helpful information as a splash screen. So you can see my network information reporting. This is a Wi-Fi only device. If this was data enabled, we would have carrier details populated there. I do have some active sync information down below and just some general information reporting back about my work environment and my security settings. If I did want to view a little bit deeper detail of these fields, I can go onto the left-hand menu and drop that down and choose these fields to look at really all the details that would be populating there. So you can see I get a good inventory report of the device information. You can see free internal storage and battery level. This would especially be helpful if you've got tablets that are kiosked somewhere, or maybe, maybe healthcare profession nurses that are walking around with tablets. You can make sure the devices aren't going to die, while you're out and about, and make sure that the battery is healthy for the job performance of that day. Security and compliance has a lot of important information handy. This will be things like your jailbroken or rooted status, for example, making sure the device is not compromised, making sure that you've got a passcode enabled if necessary. You also just get the general compliance state. So you can see that I'm in compliance. If I were to report out of compliance, I'd have the reasons listed here as well. So this is nice for record-keeping purposes, and just to get a rundown of what's been configured and restricted on this particular device. Moving on to threat management, this is the enablement of IBM's Trusteer Mobile Threat Management. So what we can do is hop into policy and enable that detection and set compliance around whether a device has malware installed. So this will detect malware signatures and applications and flag that device as out of compliance. So we will definitely touch on this in policy, how to enable that, what will take place after that. But this is the rundown of where you would really see the configuration information, when the last risk assessment was, and make sure that there is no malware currently detected. You do have some active sync information, again, that network information for data-enabled devices. The location information is where we would see the history of the whereabouts for this particular device. So if I do want to track the location information for my tablet, for example, and I can see that this has been enabled, I can see this information as the administrator, I'll be able to log into my portal, hop into the location information, and I can actually see a breadcrumb trail of where this device has traveled over a period of time. So I can customize this time frame for when this device is reporting. You can see in the last 7 days, this is where my device is checked in. It doesn't get out very often, you can see. But if the device was on the move, you would actually see it checking in for data-enabled devices every time it moved a mile. For Wi-Fi-enabled devices, you'll see as it's connecting to new networks. Now, if a device is sitting idly on iOS, it will also check in every 4 hours periodically. So as to conserve battery life and make sure you're still getting a history of that device being checked in at that same location. Applications installed is that app inventory that I referenced earlier. This is an area that can be disabled based on those privacy filters. So if you'd like to see the application inventory, maybe you're providing these devices to your end user and you want an inventory of everything that's installed across all of your devices, that's certainly a rundown that you'll get here. If this is disabled, you will still see applications that have been distributed for corporate purposes. So if you've pushed out an application by Mass 360 and it's been installed through our app catalog, it's then a managed app. You can see whether these applications have been installed, whether they've been removed after installation, or if it's pending install. This is another great area where we can set compliance around applications. So we'll touch on this in policy, but you can set restrictions about what is installed and what can be used, and also what's required for work purposes. From the documents downloaded field, I like to show this area because this gives a good rundown of all of the different content sources we can configure. In addition to different types of documents, of course, you'll be able to see documents that have been downloaded through Box, Google Drive, corporate distributed documents by Mass 360's admin. So we'll touch on the different content sources that are configurable, but this will give you visibility of whether this document has been opened or not, which can be really helpful for HR-related documentation or maybe an employee handbook. Even student handbooks, or making sure that they have their assignments for the evening. We do have certificate integration available through our Cloud Extender tool, which we'll touch on a little bit down the road in this discussion, but that is a possibility there for identity certificates. We also have that secure browser that I mentioned. So these two fields are referring directly to that secure browser and giving us the visibility of how that browser is being utilized if we'd like. So if you'd like to see where that end user is visiting on the secure browser, you have a history of what's been visited. You can also see what they've been trying to access if it's a blocked website. So you will have that visibility if you choose it, and I'll show that in policy when we get there. Now the mobile data usage is for this particular device. So if you'd like to see a breakdown of how much data this device has used, again, that can be established in our expense monitoring. Again, my device is Wi-Fi only, so I'm not going to see any data usage, but we do have the ability to configure that for the smartphones, for example, or data-enabled tablets to make sure that everyone's in compliance and not exceeding that data limit. I just want to show the custom attributes because this is an area where we can really customize some of these tags for your end users to keep track of devices and make it a little more relevant reporting-wise. We can create these flags that maybe are specific to your location or a cost center. You can keep track of warranty and PO information. For carrier purposes, maybe you can enter in the next upgrade date so that you can keep track of who's eligible for upgrade when. So there are a lot of ways that this field can be used in these custom attributes. That's another area where we can hop onto that home page and create an alert tile and search for some of this criteria to make sure that we have visibility over our concerns. The last area I'll touch on the left-hand side is this history, because this can be important for audit purposes. This is going to be a history of all actions that have been issued down to this particular device. So it'll be a nice audit trail of who's done what. You'll see who's issued that action, the IP address, whether it's been completed or not. So if you have issued, a selective light, you'll have that visibility of whether that's taken place or not. Speaking of the selective light, that's an option that's going to be on the right-hand side for you. So as the admin logs in, you'll see some MDM actions. Your remote lock to make sure the device is not being accessed inappropriately if it's left behind. So if an employee maybe leaves their phone on, maybe on the counter in a coffee shop or in a cab, you can lock it down remotely and make sure no one's in their corporate information or even their personal information in that situation. You do have the ability to reset the passcode from the portal, so this can be really helpful, especially for iOS devices. They don't have to be restored in this case. You can clear that out and the end user can choose a new passcode. Now, Android devices, I always like to point out that this is an area that's handled a little bit differently in that the admin can choose a new passcode for the device. So you could effectively lock an end user out of their device if maybe there's an HR-related incident or you're really not sure who has that device in their hand. You can make sure that the passcode is cleared out and you would choose the new one so that you would have to distribute that passcode to the end user before they could regain access. Now, the selective wipe is a feature that allows us to remove anything that's been distributed, configured, delivered by Mass 360. It's essentially removing all of the Mass 360 from the device without having to fully wipe it. So it's really great for BYOD devices because maybe it's a personal device that has personal photos and text messages, but it also contains that work information. We can remove just the work information that we've delivered by Mass 360 without having to fully wipe the personal data. This is also a revocable action, so you can actually issue the selective wipe if maybe a phone's been lost over the weekend. If the employee comes in on Monday, they find out that their phone was maybe just left on their desk, you can actually revoke the selective wipe and push all of those configurations back down to that device. So it can be a nice time saver if you have any repeat offenders constantly losing their phone or maybe leaving it behind accidentally. You can make sure that you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time with policies and distributions and that kind of thing. We do, of course, have a full wipe option, so if you want to factory restore a device or reissue it to a new end user, you can remotely wipe that device and have it passed on to the next user. You can also fully wipe a device, obviously, that's been completely compromised, and even use that as a restrictive action if a device has really kind of broken your rules in compliance terms. The other areas here are kind of just shortcuts for changing your policy, changing your rules, your data plan, some shortcuts for distributions, AirPlay session, and then this remove control, which will be really great if you have to offboard employees, for example. Maybe an employee is leaving the company, taking their personal device with them. You can remove control by Mass360 and also selectively wipe the device at the same time. So it's kind of a nice parting of ways so that you don't have to be hands-on with their device as they're leaving the company. We do have a buzz command here, so this is going to sound an alarm on the device. Really helpful if maybe you've got a phone left in a conference room or in a cafeteria. Also really helpful for devices that might have just fallen under the car seat, so you can help track it down audibly. You can also send a message from the portal. So if you'd like to send a message to this particular device, you can choose this option. And we can also create device groups and send messages that way to the entire group. So this is really nice because you'll be able to send one communication to multiple devices based on criteria that you've established. So we'll hop into groups here. You can see that send message option. And we can also have some shortcuts for group-based changes of policy, rule sets, and distributions as well. One thing I do like to point out when we go in here to change policy is that we do have the option for our workplace persona policy, which I'm going to hop into in just one moment. I just wanted to point out that this is something that we can set restrictions around location and time. So we could set up that this work information is only accessible in a certain location that we can establish as our workplace for contractors, for example. We can even set time-based restrictions so that maybe an end user can only access their email Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. After that, they'll be told that they need to return to the container at 8 a.m. the next day, for example. So speaking of the container, I'm going to hop into that policy and just briefly run through our persona policy, which is where we can configure the Mass360 application to receive corporate data. So that could be email, contacts, calendar. This could be document resources inside of that secure encrypted Mass360 application, where we have a little bit of control over where that information can move around to. So you can see the services that we can configure here are secure mail, browser, document syncing, and the document viewer for Android devices to streamline things a little bit. And then we also have a document editor that's available for iOS and Android. So you can really continue that containerization across all of your work information and make sure that it remains under your protection. Now, the passcode in this policy is applied to the application level. So this is going to be the Mass360 app, the container. You will be able to put a passcode requirement that says maybe, 6-digit passcode, alphanumeric, only on the work information. So this is really great for BYOD devices. If you don't necessarily want to impose a device-level passcode, you could make those restrictions on just the work information. And you can see over here we do have that Touch ID available now for iOS to be enabled through policy. Security-wise, we start off with some device-level security. So we can restrict access to this container if a device has been compromised, either by jailbreaking or rooting, or if that trustier flags the device as containing malware. So we can prevent access to the corporate content inside of the container while that device is in that compromised, out of compliance state. We also have a time-bound feature that allows us to set a timestamp anywhere between a week and a year, where if that corporate information is not accessed within the container, it will perform a selective wipe. So this is kind of a nice backup. If you don't necessarily have control over personal devices that are coming into the mix, they could end up as a hand-me-down device or maybe left behind on vacation. You can make sure that after this timestamp, at least the corporate data has been removed from that device. Now, the data policies down below, this is where we start getting into data leakage prevention and making sure that the information that's being provided for corporate purposes is not forwarded or used inappropriately. Restricting file export allows us to make sure that managed content, email attachments, documents pulled from SharePoint, that information can't be forwarded inappropriately through other third-party applications. So we can whitelist exceptions here to approve something like the Mass360 Secure Editor to make sure that if a device needs to open a document for editing purposes, it's remaining within that containerization or our secure productivity suite, as we call it. We can also whitelist file types. So we can specify that maybe a JPEG file can be opened freely because we don't have too much concern over the security of the information inside of that image file. We also have features like restricting clipboard export for cut, copy, paste, restricting screenshot within the container. And this is a feature that's only available within the container for Android devices. It could potentially be disabled through our MDM policy, which I'll hop into momentarily, on iOS devices to disable that across the board. You can see we have restrictions for the import of files to make sure that outside information cannot be brought into the container, restricting import for image files, widgets on those Android devices, et cetera. So this makes sure that again, the corporate information that's being provided within the container is not being used inappropriately or forwarded inappropriately. Email rights will be delivering via ActiveSync configuration, so we'll be pushing that email to the container rather than the native client, and this allows us to apply this workplace policy that we just looked at to the email content as well. In addition, we have some additional security settings for email, specifically restricting attachment forwarding in or out of your domain. This allows you to specify approved domains for whitelisted, maybe vendors or third parties, restricting email to external domains altogether, and then some contact settings below for if you'd like to specify whether personal contacts can mingle with professional contacts. The secure browser that I touched on earlier, this allows us to provide the basic settings within the browser. It works very similarly to the native browser, except that, again, we have a little bit of control over what happens there. So if you'd like to define things like home pages and bookmarks, you can do that through the secure browser policy. You can also set a kiosk mode, for example, in the browser. So this is popular in education for testing purposes. You can say that this is the only URL that can be visited. It disables the navigation away from that particular URL. The other area that we have a little bit of control over here in the secure browser is the URLs that can actually be visited. We can create these URL restrictions for filtering purposes, and these are category-based. So as you can see, there's some content that's not really appropriate for work purposes, maybe education purposes. We can make sure that these are restricted for access, and then we can go down below and we can specify whether we'd like to keep track of that visit or not. So we can block it altogether. The end user will just receive a notification that it's against the rules. We can block and track so that the admin has visibility of someone attempting to visit that URL, or we can allow and track just for reporting purposes, and we can see what people are doing. We can keep track of it, but they're not going to be restricted from visiting that URL. Down below, we can configure a whitelist or a blacklist as well. So in very restrictive environments, we could come up here and we could say we want to block all categories, and we just want to allow access to these 2 or 3 websites. So it's kind of as restrictive or as lenient as you need it to be as the admin. And you can have many different policies. So you could establish different restrictions depending on job roles and where someone falls within the company or what grade a student is in, for example. The last area that I will touch on here from the persona policy perspective is the Mobile Enterprise Gateway. This allows us to configure access to internal resources. So if you do have an internal intranet site, for example, maybe for HR purposes, you could provide access to that intranet site through our secure browser and the Mobile Enterprise Gateway access. We can leverage your directory for authentication purposes, and we can make sure that when the end user leaves the company or maybe the student moves on to another school district, the information is being completely removed from that device's access. Now I'm going to move on to the MDM policy next. This is really where we're going to configure more device level settings. So the persona policy we just looked at is again for the Mass 360 application level or our container. The MDM policy here is for the device level settings. So what we have the ability to do in our MDM policy is set things like a password requirement on the device level, for example, so that we can say that anybody getting into this device has to enter this passcode before it can be accessed. And I apologize, my network is just a little bit slow today. Let's try that again. So within the restrictions, for example, we'll see features like the camera, being able to disable a camera on a device level, being able to specify whether someone can use FaceTime on an iOS device, SD cards on an Android or Samsung Safe device, just different device level settings that we can kind of restrict as we see fit. Some companies won't really need too many of these restrictions. They may just want to say that we want a passcode on this device and we want to be able to remove your email access. Some companies really want to lock down these devices and turn off things like screen capture, for example. Touch ID, Siri settings on Android devices, you will see things like the camera also, the native browser, native email. So it will differ a little bit depending on the device type, but for the most part, we're looking at device level settings that have been approved for us to kind of manipulate through MDM restrictions. Application compliance is an area where you can configure restrictions for apps that can be used on these devices. Blacklist being applications that are not approved for use. So this is a little bit more lenient approach where we'd just be specifying what cannot be used on this particular device. In this case, maybe a policy is being pushed down to my iPad. I prefer that these end users don't use Facebook and Snapchat and that kind of thing. So these are now restricted applications, and any devices that have these apps installed, in addition to any restrictions that we're taking against that device, the admin will be notified that the device is out of compliance. We can also configure a whitelist, so this allows us just to specify what's approved for use on this device. This is a little bit stricter in that anything that's not been specified on this whitelist is going to put that device out of compliance. And then required apps allows us to specify what is required on this device in order for it to be in compliance. So if I want to make sure all of my users have Mass 360 installed, I can set that as a required app so that I'm notified if someone has removed that application. Now the compliance factor is going to respond a little bit differently depending on the device type. On iOS devices, for example, this device will be flagged as out of compliance and we'll have a compliance rule to take action for us. On an Android device, we can actually specify what action to take when that application is installed and the end user attempts to use it. So we can block the end user from using that application altogether on an Android device, or we could just prompt them to uninstall that application. So depending on how restrictive you'd like to be with those actions, they are kind of in response to that device being out of compliance. From the active sync perspective, this would be pushing mail to the native client. So this allows you to configure that setting for maybe an end user that doesn't have access to sensitive information or there's not a real security risk in terms of what that email is being received on that device. We can push this out on the native level and we can selectively wipe this configuration. The real difference here being that we don't have any control over where this information is going to move to. So if you have any concerns about maybe email forwarding or cut, copy, paste and that kind of settings, we would be looking at the containerization to make sure that the security settings are being pushed down to the mailbox in the container rather than this active sync native setting where we'd just be pushing and pulling that configuration. We do have configurations for Wi-Fi and VPN as well. So again, just making these resources available to the end user and being able to remove them with that selective wipe. So if you wanted to push out a network and password, for example, you can make sure that when the end user leaves the company, maybe they're working with their personal device, we can selectively wipe that network password from their mobile devices. The trustier threat management, this is something that we mentioned earlier. This is compliance set around applications that may contain malware. So again, we're just kind of configuring the ability to track this and configure the settings through policy. This checkbox turns on trustier detection, and then any app exceptions that may need to be bypassed from scanning can be entered here. So sometimes, you know, something like a bloatware application may be flagged as malicious. We can bypass that so it doesn't come up every time the device is scanned. Now, in terms of compliance, again, it's going to work a little bit differently depending on what type of device you have. Samsung Safe devices, for example, we can automatically uninstall applications that are flagged as containing malware. iOS devices, we have that compliance rule, which maybe we want to remove all corporate data while the device is compromised. On Android devices that are non-Samsung Safe, we have the ability to alert the end user and prompt them to uninstall, but we can't actually remove that application. So depending on the vendor APIs, they do work a little bit differently, but we do have at least the visibility and the ability to remove corporate data immediately to make sure that the information has not been compromised by the device's malware state. Now, in terms of the compliance rules, this allows us to configure kind of a chain reaction for what we'd like to take place if a device is out of compliance. So this allows us to look in the background for some common concerns and make sure that if a device is flagged as out of compliance, we can remove information, we can take action against that end user. In the example that I just used with trustier, maybe we see that an application has been installed that does contain a malware signature. We can immediately selectively wipe that device and remove all corporate configurations and data from the device while it's out of compliance. And then once that application is removed, everything's back to normal and it's back into compliance. This gets automatically reversed so that all of that information is pushed back down to that end user without any interaction on the admin side of things. You can also stagger this. So if this is just a matter of an application being installed that was blacklisted on an iOS device, maybe we want to change the policy to something more restrictive as a punishment. We could say, you know, while you're out of compliance for having Facebook installed, we want you to enter a 10-digit passcode. If you are not willing to remove that application after that, we're going to remove all of our company information until you're back into compliance. And these can be on a timed basis, either in a matter of hours or days, depending on how restrictive you'd like to be and how quickly you'd like to take action. Again, these are policies, rule sets that you can configure on group settings, so not everyone has to fall into the same restrictions. And you also have some basic settings like exemptions, for example. For important devices, maybe your CEO, you'd like to be notified if they jailbreak their phone, but you don't want to remove their information because it's the CEO. So you can make sure that the enforcement rules are kind of relevant to the job positions that you're working with. Now, one thing I like to talk about when we're looking at the enforcement rules is this enrollment rule here, because this will use the Mass 360 Cloud Extender, and it will allow us to actually block email from being delivered to a device that's not enrolled or has removed control from Mass 360. So if an end user, for example, has plugged in an active sync setting, trying to receive email on a new iPhone, we have the ability to block that from being delivered until that end user completes enrollment. And that enrollment request will be automatically delivered to them. So this is really great if you have an open BYOD environment, because that end user will not be able to bypass that enrollment into Mass 360 and the control and policies that are pushed down at that point. The Cloud Extender will also give you really great visibility of your environment. So you can see devices that are currently connecting. You can keep track and clean up old records. The Cloud Extender also has the ability to integrate with that Active Directory that we looked at for authentication purposes or just user and group visibility. So there's a lot of different functionality there, and that's certainly something that we can always help you get up and running in your environment if that's an interest that you'd like to check out there. Now, geofencing is location-based enforcement action. So this allows us to push down an enforcement action based on a device checking into or out of location, issuing out a block of email, a selective wipe maybe if a tablet has left a retail environment, or just changing a policy when the device is checked into a secure location. Maybe a medical facility for HIPAA reasons would like to disable cameras upon entry. That is a nice way to temporarily restrict the functionality of the camera so that when an end user goes home for the day, they get their camera back. So it's only within that specific location that that enforcement would be pushed down. And the location can be either address-based with a range, maybe a mile outside of your office, or this could be based on a Wi-Fi SSID. And then again, we do have that expense monitoring that allows us to set up compliance around data usage, where we can enter a plan of how much data each group of users gets on a monthly basis. And then based on a series of 3 predetermined thresholds, we have those enforcement actions that can be pushed down at that data usage point. A lot of companies just want to use this for visibility and monitoring, but we could potentially do something like a change of policy to enforce additional restrictions on a device that has exceeded their data limit. So we can't actually block or throttle data based on carrier restrictions, but we could say that if you've exceeded your data limit for the month, we want you to no longer use the native browser, we want you to use the secure browser where you can only get to work-appropriate websites. So you do have a little bit of control there in terms of who can do what. There's also really great reporting around that data usage that will break down who's used how much data on a daily basis. So if you want to see that, maybe Joe has exceeded his data limit for the last 4 months, we want to compare which applications are installed on his device. Maybe he's got Netflix and we need to blacklist Netflix. It's a really great way to reference what's going on the device and how that compares to the data that's being used across the board. Now, application-wise, this allows us to build an app catalog for our end users. This allows us to push public applications, enterprise applications. You can see we have, integration with all the major players here. So if we wanted to pull an app from the iOS iTunes App Store, we can plug in Pages here. Select the application. You can see it's a paid application, and that populates the volume purchase program field here. So if you do have paid apps that need to be pushed out to iOS devices, we can leverage that VPP where you can prepay for applications and push them out to end users, but retain ownership if the end user leaves the company, for example. So that's their token-based system. You do have also the ability to specify when you're removing applications, if you'd like to restrict data back up to iTunes. We can also feature applications now, and we can specify where this app is being distributed. This is an area that will really be helpful if you've got that AD integration turned on with Cloud Extender, because you'll be able to see your existing groups. So if you want everyone in marketing to get Pages, you can pull your marketing group, make sure it goes out to the appropriate end users, and then you can make sure that when your end users enroll in Mass 360, they'll see their app catalog with the appropriate applications for them. For enterprise applications, we do have app wrapping available. So this is kind of an easy way to extend our security policies from our workplace or persona policy to your internal application. So if you've developed something internally, you'd like to apply that Mastery 60 passcode requirement to that app, you can do that with just a checkbox. And we also have, we do offer our SDK for integration if you'd like to work some of our more advanced security features into your internal application as well. Now, document-wise, we have a lot of options in terms of providing content to the end users. This does allow us to configure either corporate distributed documents where we're uploading files and folders. So as you can see, this workflow is pretty straightforward. We're going to choose the files or folders that are being pushed out. We've got some security settings here. So if these are not already being restricted in our container, we can apply it to just this particular file. We can also specify that we'd like to password protect. Maybe on personal devices, we only want this to download on Wi-Fi so that we're preserving those personal data plans. I like this feature, especially for like an employee handbook or a student handbook. We can make sure that the end user cannot remove that file after it's been downloaded. And then again, you have your distribution options here. So we can go down to a user level, which is nice. If you've got an end user maybe with multiple devices, they'll have access to the same folder or file across all of their devices in their container. You can make this available to a single device. So if you just want to send it to my iPad and not my iPhone, we can make sure it's very specific there, especially for HR-related information or something of very sensitive nature. You can also see that we can apply a start and an expiration time. So if this is maybe a marketing promotion or something that is extremely sensitive that we wouldn't want floating around for too long, we can make sure that we set that expiration date so that maybe at the end of the month it's pulled back from that end user's access so it's no longer available within the container. This is also nice for meeting minutes for board members, for example, so you can kind of preload and pre-expire those documents appropriately. From content source perspective, this is where we have the ability to provide sources that may already be in place for your company. So we can provide access to things like IBM Connections files, SharePoint files, Windows File Share. We would use the Mobile Enterprise Gateway for that purpose, and again, that's that software tool that we would use as part of the Cloud Extender to give you that secure tunnel access to an internal resource. We also have access to things like OneDrive for business, Box and Google Drive resources, and then this other sources down below is referring to CMIS-based sources like Alfresco, for example. Now, all of this is going to be configured within the container, and we can extend some of that security to this particular resource. So if we'd like to provide access to a file share, for example, but we want to make sure that that's falling under the workplace settings for our employees, we can provide who this is available for and what kinds of group permissions we'd like to provide. We can apply all of the workplace settings, or we could just restrict export here. If we're not too concerned about the content, we can leave it completely wide open with no restrictions also. Reporting-wise, I always like to touch on the information that's populated within our built-in reporting and how customizable this area is. This gives you a good idea, again, of that data usage across the board. We also have some PC fields here for our laptop and desktop management. I didn't go too much into that, but that is the area where you would have that kind of lock, locate, and wipe functionality, pushing packages, distributing packages, and deploying right from Mastery 60 portal. And then visibility for things like making sure drives are encrypted, antivirus is up and running, and even keeping an eye on versioning and making sure that everyone's on the right versions of the software that you're pushing out or requiring on your end user's machine. We also have a lot of baked-in reporting that's available. So you can see here all of our reports kind of come with a little bit of a visual representation in addition to more detailed versions. I like this BYOD report because it does give a nice vulnerability version where you can see, just some common concerns. Are there jailbroken or rooted devices? Who's missing encryption? Who's missing passcodes? So again, this is provided in a format of your choosing. You can export for reporting purposes to provide this to another admin. You can also configure a more spreadsheet-oriented version and kind of customize what's displayed within that version. Once you configure the exact report that you'd like to view, you can export for one-time use right within your browser, or you could create a subscription as well. So this will allow you to create a subscription that specifies that this version is going to deliver to these recipients on this day of the week or the month. So you can predetermine that maybe the 15th of every month you get this report provided to these 3 email addresses. That way you don't have to come in and manually pull these versions every time your maybe CIO wants to see this information. And the last thing that I wanted to touch on is our mobile metrics here. Our mobile metrics is a built-in report based on anonymized reporting from Mastery 60 customers so that you can really see how they're using Mastery 60 based on the industry and size that may be relevant to your environment. So you can see who's supporting BYOD, how many BYOD devices are in the environment. You can also see things like what's the most blacklisted application in these environments. So it's nice to kind of see on-demand best practices from people who are currently enrolled in Mass 360 and using this as a deployed MDM service for their environment. So I know that we are getting close to the top of the hour here. I want to leave some time for Q&A, Kayla. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and review the questions that we've gotten here and start that process a little bit.
All right, sounds good. So while Lindsey is going through the questions here, I just wanted to take a moment and let you know that you can sign up for our 30-day free trial at any point in time. I know that some of you might not be ready for this. Some of you might already have signed up for your free trial, but as I mentioned, it's free for 30 days. There's no commitments. There's no credit card information that you need to submit, and there's no number or limit on the number of features you can evaluate or devices you can enroll. So really, it's the fastest to try and the fastest to buy, so I definitely encourage you to go ahead and try that out if you think you're ready for it. And also, I wanted to remind you that this is part 1 of a 3-part series. So we'll be having part 2 of this series in 2 weeks. It'll be on Tuesday at 10 a.m. And what we'll be focusing on is a deep dive of iOS devices in your mobile environment. So we hope you can join us then. What we'll do is we'll include that registration link in the follow-up email that we plan to send tomorrow, which will include today's recording, the slides, and then that registration link for the next session in the series. So we have about 15 minutes left in the hour here. We'll dedicate the rest of the time to your questions. So if you do have questions, go ahead and submit them in the Q&A box, and Lindsey will just take as many as she can. Lindsey?
Perfect. Thanks, Kayla. So I have a question regarding the Mass 360 SDK integration. And this is something where, depending on what you're trying to do, it would either be a security measure that you would work into the coding of your application using our SDK, or potentially use our app wrapping, which is more of kind of a checkbox to just inject those security measures into your app. So depending on which features you are looking to work with, it would make a little bit of a difference in terms of how comprehensive your integration would need to be. But the SDK is something that's available to all Mass 360 customers. So if you are a current customer or you're interested in trying out Mass 360, we can certainly get you more information about that. And as Kayla mentioned, we do have that 30-day trial that's available. And one thing that I did forget to mention that I normally mention is just our customer support model here, because we are available 24/7, 365. That's built into our product, so there's not a charge for additional customer service or integration help or anything of that nature. So what we would typically do for that scenario is to get you on a phone call with one of our customer engineers to make sure that you have a one-on-one session, usually an hour long, where we'd walk you through that process and answer any questions you have about that particular part of the product that you're looking for. So in terms of that integration, that's definitely what I would recommend as the next step, is just to get in touch with us about setting up a call with an engineer to walk through that process with you. I have a question regarding the secure browser. Does the secure, I'm assuming, browser work the same as Safari browser? For iOS devices, it's going to be comparable functionality to Safari. It is typically built on the native browser that ships on the device. So, example, it would be a little bit closer to Chrome on an Android device. And that would give you access to websites that you need to grant internally, maybe kiosking specific websites that you guys would provide to your end users, or just the URL filtering. So we try to provide a native experience to our end users through our Secure Productivity Suite to make sure that it's a comfortable experience for them. What I would typically recommend, if you have an internal website or a website that's built on a specific browser requirement, is that we do get you into a testing model to make sure that that website does work with the secure browser exactly as you're comfortable with, and that your end users really be able to access all of the important areas that they need of that website. So that's what I would recommend, is to get into that testing phase and see that firsthand on your devices. Regarding screenshots on an Android device, the only way to prevent screenshots is to have the app restricted in the container. So you can restrict screenshot across the board on the device through MDM policy. It would turn off screenshot altogether across the entire device. So the alternative to that would be to disable screenshot just within the container for the corporate information that you're providing. So it really depends on how much information you'd like to restrict from that screenshot functionality, but either scenario is available. Let's see. Can we wipe the device that we have lost contact with? So we do have that capability through our time bomb, for example, making sure that we can set a time frame where if the device doesn't communicate back to us through the container in a specified time frame, we would be able to selectively wipe corporate information from that device. It would need to be enrolled in MAS 360 in order to have that initial communication. So if it's not currently enrolled in MAS 360, we probably wouldn't be able to help kind of after the fact. But we could certainly look at things like, for example, that cloud extender block to make sure that email can't be delivered to unenrolled devices and that kind of thing. So we can certainly go through some best practices for what happens when we're not able to communicate with an end user's device. Let's see, how can you require certain apps to be pushed down to a device? So what we would do is we would typically create that app catalog based on what required apps are available to the end user. So we'd go through compliance, app compliance in our MDM policies, say these 5 applications are required. We'd go to our app catalog and distribute those applications. And then we want to make sure that we have visibility over those apps being installed. We can take a look at that application distribution in the device record. We can create alert center tiles and reporting based around app installs and version counts. So there's a couple of different ways we can provide that visibility so that we can make sure that the end user has the appropriate applications that are required down on their devices. We have a question about kiosk mode and secure browser options. Now, kiosk mode, I saw this pop up a little bit earlier, so I was kind of holding off to talk about kiosk mode on Android devices because that is a feature that allows us in MDM policy to specify exactly which applications are able to be used on that device. So we can set it up so that only one application is accessible. On Samsung Safe, we can make that device launch right into that application. Otherwise, the end user would power on the device and they would see a custom home page of approved applications for them. So on Android devices, you can kiosk many different applications. On iOS devices, the device does need to be in supervised mode, either through the device enrollment program or Apple Configurator, and then it's what's called app lock, and we could lock it onto just one application at this point based on Apple's restrictions. But we do have that capability there. Now, in terms of the secure browser, we also have a kiosk mode. So I'm not sure which kiosk mode this is referring to here, but the kiosk in the browser would be providing a single URL access through our secure browser and then restricting navigation away from that URL so that when that end user launches the secure browser, they can only get to that one website. We see this a lot in tablets, maybe for logistic purposes or travel companies or something of that nature where an end user might need to get just to that one website for work purposes, and that also helps a lot with data usage on the device and just kind of setting general restrictions about what can and cannot be used. Operations that are operated on a mass level. So that is similar to those group actions that I showed earlier in the webinar where we can go into a device group and we can perform actions like sending a message or changing the policy. In terms of removing a particular file, that would be something where you could distribute it through the content sources in MAS 360 as a corporate distributed file, and then we could stop distribution of that file for anything that has previously had that distributed to them. Let's see. Is there a way to restrict certain features, specifically screenshotting? So screenshots would be disabled across the board in MDM policy for iOS, Android, Windows Phone. That would be a checkbox where you would turn that feature off altogether so that no matter what that end user is doing on the device, they cannot screenshot. Now for Android devices, we can turn that off just in the container for corporate information so that when that end user is inside of the MAS 360 container working on work information or secure data, they cannot screenshot inside of the container. But if they were to go to the native side of the device and open a personal application, their screenshot functionality would return to them. If I am an app developer and the client requires MAS 360 MDM, or do they handle that, or do we need to have an SDK integrated into the app? So it really depends on how you're working with the client, how the client's MAS 360 is kind of set up to manage their devices and what your app needs to do. We do have a Mass 360 marketplace where public applications have worked our SDK into their app so that we can kind of have mutual customers between ourselves and extend our security to your application. So if that's something you're interested in, we can certainly get you more information if you wanted to get in touch with us about that. If you're more looking at just being able to manage a device outside of your application, we can certainly work with you, and you can get in touch with our channel program to kind of resell Mass 360 if that's more along the lines of how you're looking to manage the relationship with your customer. Let's see. I did the screenshot. Can we add applications and manage from the mobile first platform? So you can distribute applications and manage that from Mass 360's portal. We can work with public applications right from the public app store and specify who that application gets pushed down to. It's then a managed application, so we can also remove that using a selective wipe, for example. We can also work with enterprise applications where you've developed something internally. We can push that out to the appropriate recipients, and then we can selectively wipe. We can upgrade that out version. We can also set compliance around versioning there. So there's a lot of options. That's, again, something that we can get you more information on. We do offer that free 30-day trial. So if this is something that you wanted to try out certain functionality that I might not have gotten to today, I definitely recommend getting in touch with us so that we can help you set up that trial so that you can really get your hands a little more involved in the product and make sure that you are testing out the purposes that would be really working for your environment. I do have a question regarding an expense plan. You've created an expense plan to test, but you can't delete it. That's something we probably want to get you on a more of a troubleshooting call regarding your specific environment, just to take a look at what's currently in your portal and how you're managing your devices. But I would recommend reaching out to us so that we can get you some follow-up on that to make sure that things are working as you expected. And then I do want to kind of finish up here, but I do have a question about remote control. Remote control is going to act a little bit differently depending on the type of device. For Samsung-safe devices, we can remote into a device and actually take actions. On iOS devices, we have a remote view. Based on Apple restrictions, we cannot actually perform actions on that device, but we could remote into the device, see what's happening on the screen, and kind of help troubleshoot that way. So depending on the type of device, there's some caveats that we can certainly get you more information on. But that is something that is possible now, is remote view on iOS and remote control on Samsung-safe devices. And we are getting to the top of the hour here, so I apologize if I did not get to your question, but I do recommend you getting in touch with us so that we can make sure that we can follow up with you regarding what you are looking to accomplish with your environment, and really just kind of testing out Mass 360 to get an idea of what functionality would help with your environment.
Excellent. Thanks, Lindsey. And thank you, everyone, for submitting your questions today. Just a reminder that I'll be sending out an email tomorrow that will provide you access to the recording and slides for today's event. That way you can review anything you missed or share it with others. So on behalf of all of us here at IBM, we hope you enjoyed today's presentation and have a productive and secure rest of your day. Thanks again.
Thank you, everyone.